Well, here we go. This is kind of a trial, a pilot, if you will, of sport nutrition mini lectures, podcasts, whatever. And so I thought I would address maximal fat oxidation and kind of why it's studied and how it might relate to someone's health and/or performance, those kind of stuff. So anyway, so let's kind of get into this. Sorry about that. So we'll talk about what it is, how it's determined, what does it mean, what do the outcomes mean, and then why it's important or not. And so what it is this concept where when you look at exercise intensity, we can measure, at least estimate, sometimes measure with isotopes, but typically it's with gas exchange, a VO2 max test with a mask, whether it's portable or attached to a PC device and box, mixing chamber, and all that stuff that's housed on a cart, metabolic cart, if you will. And so look, what you have is fat oxidation in grams per minute across exercise intensities. And so as you go from kind of a walk to a jog to a run to a sprint, you get a change in contribution of fats and carbohydrates to the production of ATP, the metabolic processes. And we can measure that. So we can measure the extraction, how much O2 was used to do that work, as well as how much CO2 was produced. And typically it's done on a treadmill or cycle ergometer test while measuring O2 and CO2. Formula is based upon the amounts of O2 needed by and CO2 produced from glycolysis, beta oxidation, and Krebs cycle pathways. And so those pathways give off metabolic byproducts, which go into the calculations of how much fat. So glycolysis being carbohydrate, a carbohydrate metabolic pathway that uses glucosyl units or glucose, glycogen to produce end products that lead to ATP production or in a few ATP during the process, and then beta oxidation Krebs cycle pathways, which go into oxidative phosphorylation, respiration, cellular respiration, and mitochondrial activity to produce ATP, which have a different ratio of O2 to CO2 production, or O2 consumption to CO2 production. So anyway, so that's kind of how it's determined. And so there's, as you move across and as we produce more relative CO2, it tends to be more glycolytic. So what does it mean? So here's just an example of range. And so if somebody's at an intensity that's, this is supposed to represent 5% plus or minus. Excuse me. It's a 10% range, 5% on either side of the fat max determination. Doesn't matter. When you look at how much, the amount, it really doesn't. I mean, what is that, maybe 0.2 grams per minute, which is not much. So the intent of this is to guide exercise intensities to optimize changes in body fat. Does it do that? Does it accomplish that? Well, if we look at grams per minute, you do this for 30 minutes, that's 18 grams, right? If that's 0.6, 18 grams of body fat. How many grams in a pound? So there's 1,000 grams in a kilo, which is 2.2 basically pounds. So it's not much weight. So 30 minutes at this intensity doesn't budge a lot of measurable weight as far as body fat. It's not to say it's not important or the exercise shouldn't be done, but sometimes I think we place a lot of emphasis on this when it may not be as important. So what other factors need to be considered? One is just total calories. This is kilojoules. or energy production. And so as intensity goes up, it takes more work, more calories, more energy to do more work. So the issue is as intensity goes up, even here from 40 to 55. So here it looks, to use this example too, from 40 to 55, you have an increase in fat oxidation and an increase in carbohydrate oxidation. And so that's one of the things that I think that gets mixed too in some of these concepts. There's a crossover diagram that tends to get covered in some classes too, that so as one goes up, the other one kind of goes down, but there's a point in time in which they kind of both go up when it gets close here. But the calories are important. So if you look at 75%, it's fat oxidation is lower, and the contribution of plasma-free fatty acids and other fat sources decrease, at least relative to how this is measured, with carbohydrate sources increasing to make up for that difference and to do more, to produce more work for that. And so that's one thing to consider. The other aspect are these latter 2 points. Why is the slope after 75 so steep, and then why is it 0 at 90? 90% of VO2 max is, you can do that for minutes, and so it's one of those things where I sometimes question, and I've publicly asked this question: is fat oxidation really 0 at 90%? It may be something. From my perspective, I think some of the things that we measure get overwhelmed by the amount of CO2 that's produced, because we also remember when you get to this level, and even at 75%, and so when this starts to get steep, lactate's being produced, and one of the things that is a byproduct of lactate production is hydrogen ions, and we tend to buffer those with bicarbonate, and the bicarbonate buffering system produces CO2 non-metabolically, and so we're getting CO2 added to this system. If it's measuring CO2 production in the gas, the device does not have a way of knowing if that's from lactate or from bicarbonate, that C, the O2, the CO2 is from bicarbonate, or from through glycolysis or any other or a metabolic process. And so that's one thing I question about this 0 point at 90 is maybe there's some cells that are still using fat. It's a lower rate, sure, but so a classic example is cycling, in which your arms really aren't doing a lot. Now, they can be when you get to 90, they can be doing a little bit, but there may be some wrist, biceps, musculature that are slower twitch, that are still using fat to do some work, but it's overwhelmed by all the CO2 from other places. So, that's just one thing that I raise as a question of, how is whole body fat oxidation 0? I find that fascinating, and maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not. So leave some comments if there are data that show that our bodies just shut off the fat oxidation and for a period of time, which is fine. I have no problem with it. It's still burning a lot of calories, and the recovery process is oxidative, and so excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC, seems to be an important aspect too here, that can generate or can oxidize fat in the recovery process, in the recalibration phase, getting back to homeostasis for metabolism. So, is it important or not? Sort of. Physical activity, exercise is good. And so if body composition is something somebody's trying to change, body weight, BMI, whatever, for health, sport reasons, sure, that engage in physical activity. But focusing too much on being in the optimal fat burning zone. So it's like, well, we got to go faster because I'm not in my fat burning zone, or we got to slow down because I'm not in my fat burning zone, I think can be problematic. And so one aspect is it can complicate your exercise routine by, I've got to have a heart rate monitor. I got to have some way to measure work, or what it is relative, what percent or what degree of intensity is this work. And sometimes if you're an athlete, this may interfere with pace and what you should be working at. And so there may be some issues in which you're slowing down to stay in this zone when you need to be doing fartleks and other things that get you faster. Or, I've got 20 minutes for lunch. To exercise during my lunch hour. And so maybe it's best to just, I'm going to get 400 calories in this 20 minutes, or 300 calories in this 20 minutes, when if you're in your optimal fat burning zone, it may be 150 or 100. It's relative to whatever that intensity is where you are. And so it may be just focusing on, I want to get 200 calories in this time frame versus being in that optimal fat burning zone, which may be fewer calories, especially when it's time. When time is limited, this becomes somewhat more of an issue. And so it may complicate your routine because of that. It also may lead to some frustration. I'm in my zone. I'm in my fat burning zone. Why am I not burning fat? Why am I not decreasing body fat? Why is my body fat not changing? A lot of it could be due to just the diet side, the food side. Just because you're in the fat burning zone does not mean you're going to, at the end of a day, have less body fat than you had at the beginning of the day when you were in, and you gave 20 to 30 minutes in that zone. What did you do the rest of the day? What are you eating? Those types of things play a role as well. And so that's kind of in a nutshell. So, and to get back to it is important, again, to summarize. It's being engaged in physical activity, exercise, training, whatever for sport is important. What's your goal? And so if your goal is to change body composition, the diet part needs to be a part of this equation, and not just focusing on optimal fat burning zone, because you may find that there are other issues that could be more problematic as far as changing your body composition than being in this zone, finding the zone, being in the zone, and training in this zone. So thank you for your time. Appreciate the feedback that you give. And until next time, see you later.